My name is Thaddeus Cornelius Renshaw, and I am 95 years old. I was born in a town so small it doesn't appear on most maps, Galveen, West Virginia, a mining settlement tucked between two ridges that looked like God had pressed his thumbs into the earth and forgotten to smooth them back out. My father worked the shafts, his father before him, and his father before that. We were a family shaped by darkness and by stone, by the particular silence that lives inside a mountain, and by the kind of pride that doesn't announce itself but sits in a man's jaw, and in the straightness of his spine even when everything around him is crooked. I have lived long enough to watch 4 presidents I actually trusted get eaten alive by the machinery of power. I have outlived 2 wives, 1 son, a daughter who moved to Auckland and sends me voice messages I have to play 3 times because her accent has drifted somewhere I can't always follow. I have outlived my certainties. I have outlived my doubts. And on the 14th of February, yes, Valentine's Day, which tells you something about the universe's sense of humor, I died. Not metaphorically. Not spiritually in the way people use the word when they mean they had a hard week. I died. My heart, which had been negotiating with me for 3 years, finally stopped negotiating. The doctors at Whitmore Regional called it a sudden cardiac event. I call it a door swinging open that I had no intention of walking through. This is what happened on the other side of that door. I want you to understand something before I go further. I was not a particularly good man. I was not a monster either. I was the particular kind of man that history produces in large batches and then forgets. Someone who believed in fairness in principle and practiced convenience in life. I grew up in Galveen, where the black families lived on the far side of Oran Creek, and we lived on the near side. And the creek wasn't very wide, but it was very definite. Nobody drew the line. Nobody enforced it with signs or with law after a certain point. But the line was there the way a fence is there even after it falls. You can still see where it was. You still walk around the ghost of it. I was raised to be polite to everyone. My mother, Eudeline, stressed this with a particular intensity that I only understood much later. She stressed it because she had seen what happened when the politeness broke down. She had seen 1956. She had a cousin named Beaumont who came home from Korea and tried to vote in Galveen and found the polling station inexplicably closed. Eudeline told me these things in a careful, measured way, the way you might tell a child about a fire, enough to make them cautious, not enough to give them nightmares. What she couldn't teach me, because she didn't know it herself, was how to sit with the weight of complicity, how to understand that politeness, when it substitutes for courage, is its own kind of violence, that staying quiet in a room where someone says something vile about a group of people, because the dinner is good and the host is important and the year is 1987, and these things were said differently then, that the silence shapes you. It puts something in you, a splinter you can't quite locate. I had a lot of splinters. I tell you this because when I went through the door, the first thing I understood, and it was not a gradual understanding, it was instantaneous, total, like being plunged into a lake, was that everything I had ever thought I understood about judgment was wrong. Not slightly wrong, architecturally wrong, wrong at the foundation. There was no white light. I want to be precise about this because I have read the accounts and watched the videos, and the white light is apparently standard, and what I experienced was not that. What I experienced was more like the moment just before you remember something important, that specific tension behind the eyes, that sense of imminence, of a word on the tip of a tongue that belongs to a mouth you don't quite have anymore. And then there was presence. I cannot tell you the shape of it. I cannot tell you the color. I can tell you that it was not indifferent. That is the thing that surprised me most. I had half expected, if anything was there at all, something vast and cold and procedural, a cosmic bureaucracy, a weighing of ledgers. What I found was something that recognized me. Not my name, not my history, not Thaddeus Cornelius Renshaw of Galvine, West Virginia, aged 95, widower, retired surveyor, occasional churchgoer, man with splinters. It recognized the thing underneath all of that, the part that existed before Galvine and would exist after. It recognized that part with what I can only describe as warmth, and the warmth was not congratulatory. It was not the warmth of a teacher who is pleased with a student. It was the warmth of something that loves you despite having seen everything. Everything. That's the part that should unsettle you. That's the part that unsettled me. When I say it saw everything, I don't mean it cataloged my sins in a ledger. I mean it understood the whole shape of my life, not the events, but the interior of the events, the texture of my choices, the moments I looked away, the moments I almost didn't, the nights I held Eudeline's hand while she slept and thought about how fortunate I was, and the mornings I was cold to her over nothing, and the way those two facts coexisted in me without reconciling. It saw all of it, and it did not turn away. Here is what it showed me, and this is the part that I know will be controversial. And I am 95 years old and recently dead, and I have nothing left to protect, so I will tell you plainly. It showed me time the way you might spread a map across a table, not linear, not the thin thread of sequence I had always experienced time to be. It was simultaneous, all of it happening at once, or something beyond at once, some condition for which we don't have a word because our languages were all built inside of time and can't adequately describe the outside of it. And in that spread of time, it showed me what I can only call the architecture of human cruelty, not as condemnation, as fact. The way a doctor shows you an X-ray. Here is what is broken, and here is how it broke, and here is what it has done to the surrounding tissue. I saw the Atlantic. I saw the ships. I don't mean I watched it from a distance the way you might watch something on a screen. I was in it. I was the man being carried. I was the man doing the carrying. I was the child born into a language that had no word for what was happening to her, because no such thing had happened before, or not in this particular and systematic way. I was the plantation owner who genuinely believed, in the part of himself he had access to, that he was a good Christian man. I was the wife who looked at the quarters from the window of the house and felt something she immediately suppressed. I was everyone. Sequentially and simultaneously, I was everyone in this horror. And here is what I learned from being everyone. The horror was not natural. I want you to sit with that word, natural. There is a version of history, I grew up inside this version, it was the water I swam in, that treats the American racial order as though it were a geological feature, as though it arose from the land like limestone, as though it were simply the shape of things. This is the most successful lie in the history of human civilization. It had to be constructed. It had to be maintained. It had to be taught, generation by generation, to children who were not born knowing it. Eudeline tried to hint at this. She didn't have the words I have now. The presence showed me something else, and this is the part that broke me, in the way that things can break you and make you larger at the same time, the way a seed breaks to become a tree. It showed me what was lost, not what was destroyed, though it showed me that too, the names and the faces and the specific, irreplaceable textures of what was ended. What I mean by lost is different. I mean the accumulation, the mathematics of what was taken from the world when entire peoples were bent and broken toward purposes that served a fraction of humanity, the music that was never written, the medicine that was never discovered, the philosophy that was never articulated, the specific and unrepeatable quality of minds that were turned to cotton and tobacco and domestic service and fear. I am not a sentimental man. I was an engineer by training, a surveyor by profession. I believe in measurement. What I was shown was a measurement, and the scale of it is beyond my ability to convey. Imagine every library you have ever seen, and fill it with books, and then imagine that this represents one room in one building, on one street in one city, in a country that exists only as a ghost. All of the thinking that would have been done, all of the discoveries, the conversations, the art, the love, the science, the laughter, gone, redirected, forcibly metabolized into the prosperity of a civilization that told itself the whole time that this was the natural order. I wept. I do not have a body in which to weep, but whatever I was, in that space, it wept. And then the presence spoke, if spoke is the word. It was more like being told something without sound, the way you know a dream's logic while you're inside it. It said, and I am translating now inadequately, into a language that doesn't quite fit. It said that the accounting is real, that the universe keeps a kind of ledger that has nothing to do with law, and nothing to do with politics, and nothing to do with what any particular generation wants to believe about itself, that the harm done to people across centuries does not evaporate. It persists. It echoes forward through time in ways that those who benefit from it would very much prefer to interpret as something else, as personal failure, as cultural deficit, as the simple neutral outcome of neutral forces. The presence was clear that this is not neutral. None of it is neutral. Every advantage built on compounded theft is known. Every rationalization is catalogued. Not for punishment. This is the part I keep struggling to explain to people who ask me about this, because we are so accustomed to thinking about justice in terms of punishment, in terms of someone's suffering equivalent to the suffering they caused. That is not what I was shown. What I was shown was more like, the universe is not confused about what happened, even when the humans inside it are very, very motivated to be confused. What does God think about black people? I understand why the question is framed that way. I understand the centuries behind that framing, the centuries during which the answer was weaponized, during which Scripture was tortured into justifying things it was never meant to justify, during which the idea of divine hierarchy was invented wholesale to serve an economic arrangement, and then presented as eternal truth. I understand why anyone who has lived inside that history approaches the question with fury, or with exhaustion, or both. Here is what I was shown. The presence made no distinction. That is the word, none. Not in the way I had always been told distinctions didn't matter, not the performative color blindness that was fashionable in certain decades, which was really just another way of asking people to pretend the damage hadn't happened and wasn't ongoing. What I mean is that the presence did not recognize the categories that human beings had worked so hard to construct and so hard to maintain. It saw people. It saw the interior of people. And the interior of people, their grief, their joy, their capacity for love, their tendency toward fear, their particular beauty, did not organize itself along the lines that Galvin, West Virginia organized itself along, did not organize itself along the lines that America organized itself along, did not organize itself along the lines of any of the systems I had lived inside. This sounds simple. This sounds like something anyone might say. What made it devastating? What made me understand, for the first time in 95 years, the actual weight of what I had always nominally believed, was experiencing it as fact rather than as principle, not as an idea I held, as something I was shown. The categories we live in, the ones we fight about and legislate around and construct identities inside of, were invisible from where I stood. What was visible was the harm. The harm was very visible. And the harm organized itself not along the lines of race. It organized itself along the lines of power, of who had it, of what was done with it. They brought me back. I am told it was 11 minutes. It felt like 11 minutes in the same way that a dream feels like a few seconds, even when it contains decades. 11 minutes is the number the machines recorded. I have no reason to dispute the machines, but I also have no way to make those 11 minutes correspond to what I experienced, which felt both instantaneous and eternal, and was neither. The first thing I said when I came back, my granddaughter Isadora tells me this because I don't remember it. The first thing I said was, "We owe a debt." And then I went back under for another 6 hours, which everyone found alarming, but which was apparently just my heart deciding whether to continue the negotiation. It decided to continue, for now. I have been trying to find words for this since February. I am a surveyor. I deal in precise measurements, in the specific language of physical reality. I am not a man who reaches for the ineffable. I have lived 95 years trying to stay inside what I could verify, and this experience sits entirely outside what I can verify, and I have chosen to tell it anyway, because the alternative is to take it with me when the door finally opens for good, and that seems like a waste. What I know, or what I believe I know, because I cannot distinguish them anymore. The universe is not confused about the history of this country and what was done in it. It does not share the amnesia. It does not accept the rationalizations. It sees the ledger in full. The people who were harmed are not seen as lesser. They have never been seen as lesser. The categories that determine so much of their material lives and so much of their suffering and so much of the grief I was shown, those categories did not make the crossing with them through the door. What made the crossing was everything else: the love, the resistance, the specific ingenuity of people who were given nearly nothing and made something extraordinary of it anyway, not because suffering is romantic, but because human beings are extraordinary, and the proof of that is not found in their ease, but in their endurance. I came back different. My daughter thinks I seem calmer. Isadora thinks I seem sadder. My cardiologist thinks I need to drink more water and eat less sodium, and he is probably right. And I am choosing to tell this story instead. Thaddeus Cornelius Renshaw, 95 years old, former skeptic, former quiet man, born in Galvine, West Virginia, on the near side of Oran Creek, in a house that no longer stands, in a world that arranged itself in ways I accepted for too long because the arrangement was comfortable for me. The creek wasn't very wide, but I stood on my side of it for 95 years and called that neutrality. What I was shown is that neutrality is also a choice, and all choices are known. I don't know how many years I have left. The heart continues its negotiation. I eat less sodium. I talk to Isadora more than I used to. I called a man named Eldridge Fountain, who I treated poorly in 1979 over something that was entirely my fault, and I told him so. And he was quiet for a long time, and then he said, "I appreciate that, Thaddeus." And I told him I wasn't looking for his absolution. I just wanted him to know that I knew. He said, "That's actually worth more." I'm still working on what I owe and to whom, and how a 95-year-old man with a rebuilt heart pays any of it back. I don't think I'll finish. I think the point is to begin, and to keep beginning, and to not pretend that the creek isn't there. The door is still in me somewhere, not in a frightening way, in the way that a traveled road stays in your feet. I'll be back through it soon enough. What I hope to find when I go back is that in the time between February and whenever the negotiation ends, I managed to say something true. This is me saying something true. If this story moved something in you, hit that like button and subscribe. I have more truths left to tell, and I don't know how much time I have to tell them.